Right, so this is part 2 of the assessment when we're looking at replicating the structure and language of a piece of professional writing. At the end of our previous video, we got to this point. We had analysed the text that we had chosen and we had determined its context using the field, tenor and mode continuum. What we're going to do now is we're going to look at how do you take that text and replicate it to create your own piece of writing. So the first point in doing this is to break down your text. Now, when I looked at my text really closely, I realised there were 5 sentences in it. You might have slightly more, you might have slightly less sentences, but we know that this is sort of the type of text we're looking at and the kind of length. So I've broken it down in this case into a really simple table. I want you to do this on your PowerPoint as well. Once you've done that, I want you to look at each sentence and I want you to think about what's the purpose of each sentence. Now, I'll give you some examples here. The first sentence at the top reads, "At this point, it's probably fair to say that Team Ninja has a pretty good handle on this whole Souls-like genre thing." You can see in the blue here I've written, "The game developer is pretty good at making this type of game." So what I've tried to do is describe what it is that's really being said without being specific to the game. You notice where I originally said Team Ninja has a good handle. I've just said, okay, well that's the game developer in this case. And they're pretty good at making this type of game, which in the actual article is Souls-like. Now, the reason I'm doing this is because when I write my own piece, I actually want to match that reasoning. I want to match that purpose. And I don't want to get confused as to what's my game and what's the original game that I'm reading about. So by doing this, it allows me to really think about what is it I'm looking to achieve in each of these sentences. I'm never specific about the game or particular parts of the game. I'm always really sort of general in the way I talk about it. So once I've got a clear idea about what I'm looking to achieve in each sentence, then I've created my own sentence. Now in this case, it's based on a different game. So the game that I analysed was Wo Long Fallen Dynasty, and the game I'm writing about is Final Fantasy VII Remake. So they're completely different games, but I've used the structure and the language type of the first text in order to inform the second. So I should be able to see some connections. I'll look at the top again here. At this point, it's fair to say that Team Ninja has a pretty good handle on this whole Souls-like thing. If I look at the writing in blue, this is my writing. It's common knowledge that Squaresoft know their way around a JRPG. So what you can see in there is I've changed some of the fundamental elements. Obviously, instead of saying Team Ninja, I'm now saying Squaresoft, different developer. Instead of saying Souls-like, I'm saying JRPG, different game type. But I've also changed up the language. So rather than saying it's fair to say that Team Ninja has a pretty good handle, I've said it's common knowledge. So I'm saying the same type of thing, but I'm varying my vocabulary to give it a distinct feel and purpose. It's really beneficial to look at your writing sentence by sentence to make sure that you are consistently carrying across information. You'll have a slide in your presentation which will essentially look like this. This is my composition, this is the final piece, and this is really just me taking all those individual sentences that I wrote and just sticking them all together. That's relatively easy. I want to now look a bit closer at this process of writing your own sentences though. So the next couple of slides you don't have to include in your presentation. I'm just doing it to really break it down. I'm going to look at some individual sentences. So this is the first sentence. I've already read this a couple of times in the previous slides, but obviously it says at this point it's probably fair to say Team Ninja has a good handle of this whole Souls-like thing. Now if I use these colours, you can see the parts in the sentence that marry up, or they have the same function or purpose. So for example, the purple highlights the word Souls-like in the top sentence. In the second one, that word has now changed to JRPG, and in the third one, it remains the same. Now what you'll notice is I've given you 3 different versions of this sentence. What's called the direct transfer is where I've literally just taken out the specific information that's not relevant to my game and I've inserted the relevant information. So I just swapped Team Ninja with Squaresoft and I swapped Souls-like with JRPG. Doing this is a fairly basic way of transferring writing across, and when I'm teaching English to people who don't speak English as a first language, this is the kind of thing that we do. It's really beneficial for them to see where certain information fits in existing structures. But in year 10, I want you to be going a bit further than this, okay? Because otherwise what you're going to find is that your piece comes up as plagiarized. So we need to think of ways of saying the similar message but using different language. So you notice the difference between the second and the third sentence. The green here that says it's probably fair to say becomes it's common knowledge. The yellow that says a pretty good handle becomes know their way around. So this is essentially saying the same type of thing, but it's showing that I've got the diversity of vocabulary and language to actually make it my own as well. So this is what I want to see. I don't want to see in your work a direct transfer approach. You might start there, and I understand that, but I want you to move into that rewrite stage. That's the skill that we're developing in this case. I'm now looking at my second sentence, and in this case what you can see is that I'm working with more text. This time I'm going to look at field. I'm looking for words that might not be understood by a common audience. So if I mark these up, we can see here, like, it's the same thing that we talked about earlier, like Neo 2, it's assumed I know what that game is when I'm reading this article. Okay? When it says things like deep build customization or your own play style, those are sort of gaming terms. Like if you played a lot of games, you understand this idea of what customization or build might feel like in a game. In the same way, when you say your play style, we're led to believe that, I'm going to be more stealthy or I'm going to be more run and gun, that type of thing. You can see in the rewrite here, I've got similar aspects to it. I've got its 1997 namesake. So that's referring to the game that was created in 1997 that this game is based on, and it is assumed you know that in this case. I've taken this term graphical enhancements. Again, you might say, oh, well, anyone could get that. I know what graphics are and I know what enhancements are. But I just thought there's probably a lot behind that, in the sense that, people might be talking about movement from 30 to 60 frames per second. They might be talking about things like ray tracing, or they might be talking about things like textures. So I do think there's a little bit of a assumed knowledge that sits behind discussing graphics in a video game. Here I'm comparing the tenor. Tenor, we were looking at personal language. In the original text there were 2 examples. In mine there's 1. Now, is that a dramatic difference? No. Not really in this case. I know that some of you who are more mathsy might say, oh, well, that's 50% less. But what we're kind of saying in this case is it's not dominated by personal language. The original wasn't, and neither is mine, so it's still on the right track. This is what I did before. I marked it up for its nouns and its verbs, and again, I'm just visually commenting on the fact that there appears to be more blue than there is orange in both cases. Now, there might be more verbs in the other, but it doesn't really make a huge difference in this case. Not being really specific as to that, I'm just looking at the balance between words associated with nouns and words associated with verbs. Now, you don't need to show this for each sentence separately. You'll do it for the whole text, and I'm creating another video after this one to show you what that finished product should look like. But just be really conscious that by doing it on a sentence by sentence basis, you make sure that you maintain that consistency and you don't let the writing get away from you, which is really beneficial.